Story 1. The bike trail was one of those places that feels perfectly ordinary in daylight, a straight shot alongside the train tracks, dotted with a few exits here and there. But after midnight, it transforms into something else entirely. That's when the streetlights fade, the shadows stretch long, and the silence becomes heavy, almost oppressive. I rode that trail every night on my way home from work. 15 minutes, usually uneventful. My front light barely cut through the darkness, but I'd gotten used to it. The tunnel of dim light ahead, the looming shadows on either side. The city was busy but safe, and the quiet solitude of the ride was something I'd grown to enjoy. Or at least I used to. It started after a shift that ended around midnight. I was tired, my legs already heavy from the long day as I pushed off and merged onto the trail. The air was cool, the usual stillness wrapping around me like a blanket. But as I pedaled on, I noticed something strange, a guy on a bike behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. People ride late. It's not unusual, but the longer he stayed there, the more uneasy I felt. He didn't have any lights, which struck me as odd. Most people on this trail use lights. It's practically pitch black without them. And then, when we passed the first main exit where the trail splits toward a small town, he was still behind me, keeping pace. I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe I was tired and the dark was playing tricks on me. But just to shake the feeling, I slowed down. I thought if I let him pass, it'd ease my mind. The trail was wide enough. There was room for him to go around, but he didn't. Instead, he matched my speed, keeping the same distance behind me, not coming closer, not passing, just there, drifting along like a shadow that wouldn't let go. That's when the unease turned into something heavier, a creeping, gnawing fear I couldn't shake. I started to wonder if this guy was following me. I was only a few minutes from home, but I decided to take random turns instead of heading straight there. I didn't want him knowing where I lived if he was, in fact, trailing me. Suburban neighborhoods offered plenty of twists and loops, and I used everyone I could think of to throw him off, but he was still there. No matter how many turns I took, he stayed just far enough behind me, following my every move. I could feel my pulse quickening, my hands gripping the handlebars tighter as the panic set in. My legs burned as I pedaled faster, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do. I couldn't go home, not with him behind me, but I couldn't keep running in circles forever. Then I saw it, a house with a dark, shadowy garage. I turned sharply, heading straight for it and jumping off my bike. I pushed it into the shadows, crouching low and holding my breath as I waited. I heard the bike pass by, the faint hum of wheels cutting through the silence. He didn't keep going though. He braked hard just ahead on the next small, dark path meant only for bicycles. My blood boiled as I crouched there, my ears straining to hear his next move. After what felt like an eternity, I climbed back onto my bike. I pedaled to the end of the street, stopping just before the curve. He was there, ahead of me now, just barely visible in the darkness. I couldn't see his face. My light didn't reach. But I stared anyway, hoping he'd think I was looking straight at him. And then I bolted. I pedaled faster than I ever had before, my muscles screaming as I pushed harder, taking extra loops and turns until the trail was empty again. I didn't stop until I felt safe, alone in the silent night with no sign of him behind me. When I finally made it home, I locked the door, my heart still pounding. I don't know who he was or why he was following me, and to be honest, I'm happy not knowing. Some mysteries are better left unanswered. Story 2. Late shifts at the movie theater weren't just about counting inventory and cleaning popcorn machines. They had a vibe, a stillness that felt more eerie than peaceful. The place was too quiet after the last show ended, the echoes of laughter and movie soundtracks fading into something that made you notice every creak, every flicker of light. And for me, one night will always stand out as the moment I realized how much I didn't want to be there after dark. It started like any other closing shift. The last customers had left, the lights were dim, and the hum of the vending machines was the only sound that filled the place. I was in the office with one of the other managers, Jen, who'd been working the nightly deposit while I wrapped up inventory numbers. To pass the time, we had a small CD player playing softly, random old CDs we'd found in a drawer. I just stood up to swap out the CD, reaching for the stack sitting on the desk next to it. I popped in a new one, sat back down, and barely a minute later it happened. The entire stack of CDs, maybe 6 or 7 of them, suddenly launched themselves across the room. It wasn't a slow tumble or a clumsy slide. It was violent. The CDs flew, scattering across the floor like someone had grabbed them and hurled them with force. One hit Jen square in the back of the head, making her whip around in confusion. "What the?" She stared at me wide-eyed as I sat frozen, dumbfounded with CDs now surrounding me. "What the hell was that?" she asked. I don't know," I stammered, my heart racing. "I didn't touch anything." We both stared at the floor, then at each other. There was no wind, no sudden movement, nothing that could have caused it. The CD player itself was still sitting calmly on the desk, as if mocking us for thinking it might have been involved. Jen rubbed the back of her head and muttered something about being done for the night. We finished up the bare minimum of paperwork, locked up, and got the hell out of there. Neither of us spoke about it on the drive home, but the uneasy silence said enough. The next morning, I got a call from another manager, Lori, who'd worked the day shift. Her voice sounded annoyed, which was unusual. She was usually pretty laid back, especially toward me. "What were you two doing last night?" she asked. "Closing the office," I said, confused. "Why?" She sighed, sounding frustrated. "Why did you dump all the security tapes onto the floor?" "What?" I replied, my stomach sinking. "We didn't touch the tapes." She went quiet for a moment, then explained what she'd found. The tapes, old VHS security tapes we barely used but kept stacked neatly on a small shelf, had been strewn all over the floor. Not only that, but the plastic sleeves that held them were scattered, ripped off, and thrown across the office. "What about the shelf?" I asked, grasping for logic. "Was it tipped over or moved?" "No," Lori said sharply. "The shelf's fine. It's like someone just grabbed the tapes and threw them around." I felt a chill run down my spine, thinking back to the CDs launching across the room. "We didn't touch them, I swear," I insisted. "We were just doing inventory. We didn't go near the tapes." She sighed again, clearly not convinced, and told me she'd clean it up. "Just be more careful next time, okay?" "Yeah, okay," I said, though I knew there was no careful about it. Whatever was happening wasn't us. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. The CDs, the tapes, it didn't make sense then, and it doesn't make sense now. All I know is that working late shifts never felt the same afterward. That office wasn't just an office anymore. It was something else entirely, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out what. Story 3. It wasn't the drive up the road to Hana that stuck with me. It was the way down, in the dead of night, that I can't forget. If you've ever been on that road, you'll know it's breathtaking. Lush greenery, waterfalls around every corner, cliffs dropping straight into the ocean. My mom wanted to do the whole tourist experience, but of course, she refused to settle for a tour bus. That wasn't her style. So against the advice of the rental company and every sane person we talked to, we took a car. The drive during the day was fine, stunning actually. We stopped at every lookout, explored little trails, and took way too many pictures. By the time the sun went down, though, we were exhausted. And instead of turning back onto the main route, we somehow ended up on one of the less traveled, closed-off local roads. My mom figured it was a shortcut. She's the type who sees road closed as more of a suggestion than a rule. This wasn't just any road, though. It was narrow and winding, hugging the edge of the island with no barriers. If you so much as sneezed too hard while driving, you'd plummet into the ocean. There was no room to pull over, no space to breathe, really. It was pitch black, the only light coming from our headlights and the occasional sliver of moonlight. And the silence? Deafening. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. At one point, we came to this bend in the road. It backed into a dense forest, with a small waterfall trickling into a pool nearby and a cliff overhang looming above us. My mom, ever the photographer, decided this was the perfect spot to stop and take pictures of the stars and ocean. I wasn't thrilled about the idea. Something about the area felt off. But I got out of the car anyway, mostly to keep her company. The night sky was stunning, sure, but the stillness felt unnatural. No wind, no rustling leaves, not even the sound of insects. Just this overwhelming quiet. Then cutting through it, I heard something. A baby, crying. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It didn't make sense. We were in the middle of nowhere, hadn't seen another car or person in hours. I turned to my mom. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" she asked, lowering her camera. "A baby crying." She frowned, clearly thinking I was imagining things, but stood still for a moment, listening. Nothing. She shook her head, brushing it off. I tried to do the same, but the sound had been so clear, so distinct, that it stuck with me. We stood there for a few more minutes, the silence pressing down on us. Just as I started convincing myself it was all in my head, the crying started again. Louder this time. My mom's face went pale. "Okay, I heard it," she said, her voice tight. We stood there frozen, trying to pinpoint the source. The sound seemed to echo, bouncing off the trees, the cliff, and the waterfall. It wasn't coming from any one direction. It was everywhere and nowhere all at once. "Hello?" My mom called out, her voice shaking. "Is anyone there?" No answer, just the crying, faint and desperate, like it was coming from somewhere deep in the forest. We couldn't see anything, but the sound was sharp enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "What do we do?" I asked, glancing nervously toward the trees. "What if someone needs help?" My mom hesitated, clearly torn. We weren't the kind of people who could ignore a cry for help, but the whole thing felt wrong. The more we listened, the more unnatural it sounded. Too consistent, too deliberate. It wasn't just a baby crying, it was something pretending to be a baby crying. "Let's go," my mom said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now." We got back in the car and slammed the doors, the sound startling in the oppressive quiet. My mom started the engine, and we pulled back onto the narrow road, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The crying stopped. We didn't talk for the rest of the drive. Every shadow in the forest felt like it was watching us. Every turn in the road felt like it was leading us deeper into something we couldn't explain. When we finally got back to the hotel, the warmth of the lights and the hum of other people felt surreal, almost jarring. We never told anyone about it. I think we both knew no one would believe us, and even if they did, what would we say? That we heard a crying baby in the middle of a deserted road but couldn't find it? That it stopped the moment we decided to leave? I still think about that night. I've read about legends, stories of spirits using cries to lure people into the woods, but I don't know if I believe any of them. All I know is that something was out there, something that didn't want us to leave, or maybe something that wanted us to stay. And I'm grateful every day that we didn't. Story 4. The valleys in Alaska are quiet in a way that creeps into your bones. It's not just the lack of sound, it's the sense that something is watching, something the silence is hiding. I'd never felt that so vividly until my friend and I decided to camp on the way to the summit of a peak that required more than a day's trek. To get there, we had to cross mountain ridges, descend into a valley, and climb out the other side to hit the next set of ridges. The valley was a natural windbreak, surrounded by tundra and scattered with patches of sparse trees. It seemed like the perfect place to set up camp for the night, especially after hours of grueling hiking. But that decision still haunts me. The campground near the trailhead was deserted when we arrived. No cars, no people, just us, the trail, and miles of wilderness. To come from any direction other than the one we had would mean trekking over 100 miles from the nearest town. We knew we were completely alone out there. At least that's what we thought. Night fell quickly, and the temperature dropped even faster. We were bundled in our sleeping bags, the thin fabric of the tent barely holding back the chill. The stars were out, brighter than I'd ever seen them, but I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling in my chest, like the air itself was heavier in the valley. My friend must have felt it too, because we didn't talk much, just lay there in the dark, listening to the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant sound of the river. And then we heard it. Footsteps. Not the quick, light patter of an animal, but slow, deliberate human steps, crunching through the tundra, getting closer with each step. My heart started pounding. I turned to my friend, barely able to make out his face in the faint glow of the moonlight filtering through the tent. He'd heard it too. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response, Just the footsteps, steady and unhurried. I reached for the bolt-action rifle we'd brought for bears, fumbling with the safety. "We're armed," I warned, trying to sound braver than I felt. The footsteps paused as if whoever or whatever it was had heard me. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then came the breathing, raspy, uneven, undeniably human. My stomach turned to ice. The steps started again, this time circling the tent. Something knocked over our makeshift clothes-drying rack, the clatter of metal poles echoing through the valley. My friend whispered, "What do we do?" But I didn't have an answer. My hands were clammy on the rifle, my mind racing. "Leave!" I shouted. "Now!" That's when the footsteps changed. They picked up speed, running past the tent and into the darkness, away from the direction of the campground. The sound of them faded quickly, swallowed by the vastness of the valley. But there was something off. There was no shuffling or rustling, no sound of a pack shaking as they ran. It was eerily smooth, like the person, if it even was a person, was gliding over the ground. We didn't sleep. The tent felt like a paper-thin shield between us and the unknown. Every noise outside made us jump. Every shift of the wind sounded like those footsteps coming back. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the valley, we were both sitting upright, bleary-eyed and clutching the rifle. When we finally stepped out of the tent, the scene was unsettling. Our clothes-drying rack was destroyed, twisted into a shape that didn't make sense for someone simply knocking it over. And the boot prints, small, almost child-size, were pressed into the dirt, leading toward the tent and then away in the direction they'd run. There were no other tracks, no sign of where they'd come from or where they'd gone, just that single trail in and out. We packed up as quickly as we could, our eyes constantly scanning the trees and the ridges above. The summit no longer felt like a goal. It felt like something we needed to reach just to get out of that valley as fast as possible. When we finally made it back to the campground days later, the eerie emptiness hadn't changed. We didn't talk about what had happened, not then. It wasn't until we were driving back to civilization that my friend broke the silence. "Do you think it was... who would be out there that far?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't know. I still don't. But I haven't gone camping in a place like that since, and I don't think I ever will. Story 5. Back in the early 90s, I was working as an assistant manager at a Domino's Pizza. We had this policy for deliveries. If the porch light wasn't on, we were supposed to head to a payphone and call the customer before approaching the house. It was all about safety and cutting down on robberies. Problem was, nobody really followed the rule, myself included. Except for this one night. It was just past 11 p.m., and I had one last delivery in a middle-income neighborhood. Seemed routine enough, except as I pulled up to the house, I noticed it was pitch dark. Not a single light on, not even the porch. Normally, I'd just grab the pizza and knock anyway, but something about it made me stop. My gut told me not to get out of the car, and I've always trusted my gut, so I backed out of the driveway and drove 2 blocks to a payphone. I called the number on the order, disconnected. That gave me pause. Per policy, I was supposed to call twice, just in case. If nobody picked up on the second call, we were supposed to head back to the store. I decided to give it a few minutes before dialing again. While I was standing by the payphone, a Pizza Hut delivery car caught my eye as it drove past. I didn't think too much of it. We spotted each other out on the road all the time. But as I made my second call, still disconnected, I started to feel uneasy. Something wasn't right. For some reason, I decided to go back to the house, maybe just to see if someone had come to the door. It didn't feel like the smartest move, but curiosity got the better of me. As I approached the driveway again, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The Pizza Hut car. It was parked in the same driveway, right where I'd been minutes before. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath, pulling in behind it. The driveway was long and lined with these tall, evergreen shrubs on one side. As soon as I parked, I noticed something lying on the ground next to the open driver's door of the Pizza Hut car. My first thought was that the driver had gotten sick or maybe even had a heart attack. I jumped out and ran over, prepared to help. But the second I got close, I froze. It was the driver, all right. But his skull had been caved in, so bad I could actually see his brains. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My legs felt like they might give out from under me. It wasn't something you could prepare for. The reality of it hit me like a punch to the stomach. I don't remember how long I stood there staring. Maybe a few seconds, maybe longer. All I knew was that I had to get out of there, fast. I turned and bolted back to my car, locking the doors as soon as I was inside. My hands were shaking so badly it took me a couple tries to get the keys in the ignition. When I finally got the engine running, I floored it, driving the 2 blocks back to the payphone at 90 miles per hour. I called the cops first, struggling to keep my voice steady as I told them what I'd seen. Then I called my store, told my coworkers what was going on, and asked them to get in touch with Pizza Hut. I didn't stick around at the payphone. I drove straight back to the Domino's and didn't go out again that night. I heard bits and pieces of what happened afterward. The cops swarmed the area, and it turned into a murder investigation. I don't know if they ever caught the person who did it, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. That image of the driver lying there, his car door wide open, is something I've never been able to shake. That night changed the way I approached every delivery after. I started following the rules to the letter. If there was no porch light, I didn't get out of the car. I didn't take chances. My gut had saved me once, and I wasn't going to push my luck again. Story 6. The call came through just after midnight, the time of night where everything feels stretched thin, like the quiet could snap at any second. I was on duty with a couple of other guards, sitting in the security office staring at the grainy CCTV feeds, trying to fight the pull of exhaustion. That's when dispatch buzzed in. "There's been a report of screaming in elevator 4, the voice on the other end said, flat and professional, but it still made me sit up straighter. Screaming? My coworker Greg raised an eyebrow at me, already halfway out of his chair. "Middle of the night, no one's around, and suddenly it's screaming," he muttered, grabbing his flashlight. "Always something, isn't it?" The building itself was one of those towering office complexes with reflective windows that made it look sleek during the day, but eerie and lifeless at night. By midnight, almost everyone was gone, save for the janitors and us security staff. Elevator 4 was in the east wing, which was even quieter. I don't think I'd seen anyone use that wing at all that night. We walked over together, the echo of our footsteps bouncing off the marble floors. As we rounded the corner, I could hear it, the faint sound of screaming. It wasn't constant, more like bursts of frantic, panicked cries. I'll admit, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't the kind of sound you expect to hear coming out of an empty elevator shaft. "Let's check it out," Greg said, stepping closer. The screaming got louder as the elevator moved. It was on the 5th floor, and as we watched, it descended to 4. 3. The sound seemed to fill the air, raw and desperate. But as soon as the doors opened on the ground floor where we stood, it stopped. Dead silence. Greg and I exchanged a look. He leaned into the elevator, shined his flashlight around, but there was nothing inside. Just an empty, spotless car. No signs of anything unusual. "Maybe someone's stuck between floors," I suggested, though my voice sounded unsure even to myself. Greg hit the button to send the elevator back up, and as it ascended, the screaming started again. Loud and guttural, like someone was in real pain. We ran to the stairs, splitting up to check every floor. I stayed on the ground floor while Greg posted himself at the 2nd, and another guard, Ellie, stationed herself on the 3rd. Each time the elevator stopped, we waited, tense and ready. And each time the door slid open, we were greeted with nothing but silence. The screaming only came when the elevator was moving. By now, Ellie was on edge, her voice crackling through the radio. "This is some messed up stuff," she said. "You sure this isn't a prank?" "If it is, someone's really committed to it," Greg replied, but his usual sarcasm was missing. I could tell he was just as rattled as the rest of us. We called maintenance. None of us wanted to admit we were spooked, but we figured it was better to let the professionals handle it. When the maintenance guys arrived, they treated it like a joke at first, rolling their eyes and grumbling about late-night calls for nothing. Until they heard it. The elevator was moving between floors again when the screaming started back up. Louder than before. One of the maintenance guys, a burly guy named Dave, visibly paled. "What the hell is that?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to appear behind him. "Your problem now," Greg muttered, stepping back and crossing his arms. Dave and his team inspected the elevator top to bottom, inside and out. They checked the shaft, the wiring, the control panel, everything. But they couldn't find a single thing wrong. No mechanical issues, no signs of tampering, nothing. Eventually, the screaming stopped. Just stopped as suddenly as it had started. The maintenance team shrugged it off, chalking it up to some kind of glitch or interference. But the rest of us couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the sound itself. It was the way it came and went, how it felt too real to be a malfunction, but too impossible to explain. After that, I avoided elevator 4 whenever I could. Story 7. The trail was quiet that day, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. It was late afternoon and the sun was dipping low, throwing long shadows across the path. My dog and I were walking along a trail at Beverly Beach State Park in Newport, Oregon. A beautiful place, with a large creek running alongside to the left and a steep, brush-covered hill to the right. You could still see the RVs and tents on the other side of the creek through the trees, close enough to remind you civilization wasn't far. But it didn't feel that way. I wasn't really expecting to see anyone out there. The campground had been pretty quiet, and the trail wasn't exactly bustling. But then I spotted someone up ahead, a kid about my age, 14 or so, standing off to the side. He looked alone, which didn't seem weird at first. I mean, I was alone too, except for my dog, and he wasn't even wearing a leash half the time. I felt a little lonely out there, to be honest, so I decided to approach him. I figured it wouldn't hurt to say hi. But my dog had other ideas. We were about 50 feet away when my dog started freaking out. Full-on panic mode. He's usually the friendliest dog you could imagine. The kind who runs up to strangers wagging his tail so hard it looks like it might fall off. But this time, his hackles were raised, his teeth bared, and his tail was tucked so tightly it practically disappeared. He was barking, snarling, pulling against the leash like he wanted as much space as possible between him and that kid. It wasn't just unusual, it was terrifying. I tugged on the leash, trying to calm him down, but it was like he'd planted himself on the ground. He wouldn't budge. His eyes were locked on the kid, and there was a look of pure fear in them, the kind I'd never seen before. My heart started racing, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe the kid had some weird smell on him, or maybe my dog was just tired and cranky. Dogs get spooked, right? Still, I decided to play it safe. I gave the kid a wide berth, dragging my dog along with me, one slow, agonizing step at a time. As we passed, I gave the kid an apologetic smile and said, "Sorry about him. He's not usually like this." The kid didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his head slowly turning to track us as we passed. His eyes, there was something about them I can't explain. They didn't blink. He didn't look curious or annoyed or scared. He just stared, like he was watching something he didn't quite understand. As soon as we got past him and he was out of sight, my dog relaxed instantly. His tail started wagging again, and he was back to his happy, goofy self, like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I stopped and looked back, half expecting to see the kid standing there, staring after us. But he was gone. At first I thought maybe he'd wandered off the trail or taken a different path. But as I looked around, I realized that didn't make sense. There was nowhere for him to go. To the left was the creek, and to the right was the steep hillside, thick with brush and impossible to climb. The trail was straight and clear. If he'd taken off in either direction, I would have seen him. Even if he'd run, he couldn't have gone far in the 30 seconds I'd had my back turned. And yet, he was gone. Something in me, curiosity, stupidity, I don't know what, made me turn around and head back the way I'd come. My dog didn't seem thrilled about it, but he followed me anyway, his tail low and his ears twitching. I walked back to the spot where I'd seen the kid, scanning the trail and the surrounding area for any sign of him. Nothing. Not a single footprint, no rustling in the brush, no sound of footsteps in the distance. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. I stood there for a while, my mind racing, trying to come up with an explanation that made sense. Maybe he'd been a camper messing with me. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But no matter how I spun it, I couldn't explain my dog's reaction. He'd seen something, felt something, and whatever it was, it had scared him more than anything else I'd ever seen. Eventually, I gave up and headed back to the campground, my dog sticking close by my side the whole way. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Not my parents, not the other campers. No one. What was I supposed to say? That I'd seen a kid who disappeared and my dog had lost his mind for no reason? It sounded ridiculous even to me. Story 8. The airfield was the kind of place that felt eerie even on the brightest days. It stretched out endlessly, the disused runways cracked with weeds and silence. My job was tucked away in a small business on the estate, a nondescript building surrounded by abandoned hangars. On most days, it was harmlessly quiet, but that afternoon, it was just me there, alone, and something didn't feel quite right. It was late in the day, and the sun was still shining through the narrow office windows. My colleague had been out at a meeting all morning, leaving me to man the office on my own. The early rush of work was long done, and the place had fallen into stillness. I'd killed enough time scrolling aimlessly, sipping on lukewarm coffee, before finally deciding to take a bathroom break. The layout of the building was odd, almost maze-like. To get to the toilets, you had to head downstairs, take a right at a crossroads where the front door sat on your left, pass through an empty warehouse, and loop around to a narrow corridor directly beneath the main office. I'd done it countless times, and it always felt unnecessarily far, especially when you were the only one in the building. I was halfway through washing my hands when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the heavy front door opening and closing. The bang was loud enough to echo down the hallway. My first thought was that my colleague must have returned, or maybe it was one of the delivery drivers who popped in occasionally. Still, something about it made my skin crawl. I tried to shake it off, leaning up to glance out the small bathroom window. The parking lot was visible from there. Empty, save for my car. No colleague, no delivery trucks, nothing. My unease grew as I stepped back into the warehouse. The floorboards overhead suddenly creaked, sharp and deliberate. I knew that sound too well. It was the sound of someone walking up the stairs to the main office. My heart pounded as I froze, staring up. I could tell which step they were on by the noise, each grown familiar from countless trips up and down. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to hide. The steps continued, steady, until I heard the main office floorboard give its telltale creak. Someone was up there. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking slightly. No answer. I hurried through the warehouse, circling back to the bottom of the stairs, my eyes darting everywhere. The front door, locked from the inside. The corridor, empty. The only sound was my own shallow breathing. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. I gritted my teeth and climbed the stairs, each one seeming taller than before. 1,000 thoughts ran through my head, none of them comforting. By the time I reached the top, my fists were clenched tight, my keys poking out between my knuckles like makeshift brass knuckles. I turned the corner and glanced into the office. Empty. The main room was spotless, the papers on the desk undisturbed, the chairs pushed neatly against their desks. The silence was deafening. The only place anyone could be hiding was the conference room across the landing. Its door was shut, and inside, it was pitch black. There was no way I was opening that door on my own. I bolted downstairs as fast as I could. Just as I reached the warehouse floor, my colleague pulled into the parking lot, his car filling the space with a noise that was almost too loud after the oppressive quiet. I ran out to meet him, spilling the whole story in a frantic rush of words. He didn't laugh, just nodded, grabbed a flashlight, and said, "Let's check it out." I followed him back up, every creak of the floorboards making my pulse jump. He pushed open the conference room door, and I hit the lights. The room lit up in harsh fluorescent brightness. It was empty, of course. Nothing in the corners, nothing behind the stacks of chairs. The warehouse below, empty. Every room, every crevice, every locked door checked. No one was there. I know what I heard. The heavy front door opening and slamming shut, the floorboards groaning under someone's weight, the sound of footsteps climbing the stairs. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the building settling, and there was no way anyone could have gotten past me without me seeing or hearing them leave. To this day, I have no explanation. All I know is that I never stayed in that building alone again. Some places just aren't meant to be quiet. Story 9. The suburban streets were always silent at 2 a.m., eerily so. That stillness had never bothered me before. Not until that night. My roommates, Luke and Jen, and I shared a house in one of those meticulously planned developments. Pools, parks, community gardens, the works. The downside? Public transit in our area wasn't exactly convenient. Luke worked late shifts that ended around 10 p.m., and the bus dropped him off about 10 miles from the house. To save him the dangerous late-night walk, I offered to pick him up if he pitched in a bit on utilities. It worked out well. Jen would often join me for the drive, sometimes turning it into an excuse for late-night snacks or gas station runs. This particular Sunday night, I was out cold after a long day. I woke abruptly, my name cutting through the haze of sleep. Waki, Waki. Jen's voice echoed faintly but insistently. At first I thought it was part of a dream, but the sound persisted, dragging me into consciousness. Waki, Waki, she called again from just outside my window. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. Confused and groggy, I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. 2 a.m. Sunday. My brain struggled to make sense of it, but one thought cut through the fog. I must have fallen asleep and missed Luke's text asking for a ride. Jen was waiting for me in the driveway, calling to let me know we were late. Coming, I shouted back, my voice groggy and hoarse. The calling stopped. Scrambling out of bed, I yanked on a jacket, grabbed my keys, and stumbled downstairs. My mind was still clouded by sleep, so I didn't even stop to think about how odd it was for her to be outside waiting instead of texting me. I pulled on my sneakers and opened the garage, expecting to see her standing there under the yellow glow of the streetlight. There was no one. The driveway was empty except for my car. The dying rose bush next to it barely cast a shadow under the dim light. I squinted into the quiet darkness of the street, scanning for any sign of her. Maybe she'd wandered a bit further for a cigarette since she knew how much I hated the smell. But there was nothing. No movement. No Jen confused, I stepped back inside, closing the garage behind me. My first thought was that maybe she'd gone inside, so I rushed upstairs to check. The hallway was dark except for the faint glow of light seeping out from under both Luke's and Jen's doors. They were home. My stomach sank. What? I called out. Jen? No response. The unsettling realization hit me like a wave. If Jen was in her room, who had been outside calling my name? Heart racing, I dashed to my own room to check my phone, the weight of unease growing heavier with each passing second. When I unlocked it, the screen confirmed my worst fear. No missed messages from Luke. No calls from Jen. Nothing but the cold, unyielding time glaring back at me. 2:03 a.m. on a Sunday. My pulse thundered in my ears as the pieces fell into place. Luke didn't work Sundays, and Jen would have had no reason to be outside at this hour. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was a prank? Some random neighborhood kid playing tricks? But how could they have known my name, much less repeated it with Jen's distinct voice? And why did it sound so real? I crept to my window, slowly peeking out into the driveway one last time. The street was still and empty, bathed in a dim, almost surreal glow from the streetlights. My gut twisted into knots. Nothing about this felt right. The night felt wrong, as though I had somehow stepped into a place I didn't belong. I locked every door and window in the house that night, my heart pounding with every click of a deadbolt. I couldn't bring myself to sleep, though I tried to shake it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. Deep down, I knew it wasn't. Whatever had happened, it was something I couldn't explain, and something I hope never to experience again. Story 10. When you're 13, summer nights feel endless, full of adventure, laughter, and a little bit of mischief. For my best friend and me, those nights meant wandering around her quiet exurb, a place that wasn't quite the countryside, but close enough. The houses were spread out, the streetlights were few and far between, and the world felt open in a way that made you believe nothing bad could ever happen. We knew the area like the backs of our hands, and there was never a sense of fear, not even in the stillness of the darkest hours. That's why it stands out so vividly. The one night when everything changed. It started like any other. The air was warm, the cicadas were humming, and the sky was so clear you could see every star. We didn't have a plan. Why would we? The night was ours and we just wandered wherever our feet took us. Our usual haunts weren't cutting it that evening though, and we decided to explore a road we hadn't gone down before. It wasn't anything special, just a narrow stretch cutting straight through a field. Tall grass swayed gently on either side, and every so often a faint breeze would rustle through the wildflowers. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but we were too caught up in the fun of breaking our routine to notice. The road ended in a cul-de-sac, its edges overgrown and untamed. At the far end, a massive iron gate stood tall, blocking a dirt driveway that disappeared into the darkness beyond. It looked out of place in an otherwise simple landscape, its ornate design and sheer size suggesting there was something significant hidden behind it. We approached slowly, our shoes crunching against loose gravel. Up close, the gate was even more imposing, its bars tangled with vines and rust, as though it hadn't been opened in years. We lingered, staring down the driveway, trying to make out what lay beyond. The moonlight caught on the gravel path just enough to make it visible for a few feet before it curved away, swallowed by shadows. It was the kind of thing that felt like it belonged in a mystery novel. A hidden driveway, an old gate, an empty night. I remember debating with my friend whether we should try to climb over it. We were teenagers after all, and nothing screamed bad idea to us quite like a mysterious gate. I glanced at her, grinning, already starting to weigh the pros and cons of the climb. But before either of us could make a move, something shifted in the air. It's hard to describe, but it was like the atmosphere turned heavy, oppressive. The warmth of the night seemed to fade, replaced by a chill that crept along my skin. My chest tightened, and for the first time in years of wandering these streets, I felt truly, deeply afraid. My smile dropped, and when I turned to my friend, I saw that she felt it too. Her wide eyes mirrored my own, and she looked like she wanted to run but couldn't quite move. It wasn't a sound or a movement or anything tangible, just this overwhelming sense of dread that filled the air like a fog. It pressed down on me, thick and suffocating, making my heart race. I've felt scared before, but this was different. This wasn't the kind of fear that comes from seeing something scary or hearing a strange noise. It was primal, raw, and unexplainable, like every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out of there. I didn't say anything, and neither did she. We didn't need to. In unspoken agreement, we turned and bolted. We ran faster than I thought possible, our feet pounding against the gravel, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent night. The air seemed colder the farther we got from the gate, as though the fear itself was chasing us. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't dare slow down. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, refusing to look back, terrified of what I might see if I did. By the time we reached the end of the road, back where the field gave way to the familiar sight of houses and streetlights, we were breathless, trembling, and utterly spent. We collapsed onto the curb, our bodies shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence of the cul-de-sac still hung over us, heavy and impenetrable, even though we were now surrounded by the comforting sounds of the suburban night. Eventually, I worked up the courage to glance back the way we'd come. The road stretched out behind us, straight and empty, with no sign of the gate or the shadows beyond it. Everything looked normal, just another quiet street in the middle of nowhere. But I knew better. We both did. What was that? I finally managed to gasp, my voice shaky and weak. My friend didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "I don't know," she said, "but I don't want to go back and find out." Neither did I. We tried to laugh it off as we walked back to her house, making jokes about how our imaginations had gotten the better of us. But the fear lingered, even as we climbed into bed and tried to fall asleep. It wasn't just the fear itself. It was the fact that we both felt it at the exact same time. If it had just been me, I might have been able to convince myself that I'd freaked myself out, let my mind run wild in the darkness. But it wasn't just me. Whatever it was, it had gripped us both, and it had been real enough to send us running. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.